Welcome back to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here, joined as I often am by my colleague, my partner in crime, I was going to say my boo-boo to my yogi, but like that's really offensive. So I'm glad I didn't say that. Dan, what's going on, man? How are you?
Great reference. I'm a big Yogi Bear fan, but Boo Boo too. I'm good. Not much. Well, there is a lot going on, and I think
Oh
that's
my
what
goodness.
we're going to talk about on this podcast today. For me personally, not a
Yeah.
lot going on. School for the kids, work, and all the like, but not much. Good to be here though.
Yeah. And this is one of those shows. I'm trying to remember the last time we may never have done a show exactly like this, but we try to focus on educational trend spotting and future of learning, future of media, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes the world has so much activity in it that we just need to do a show to kind of reflect on what's happening in the world around us. And I think that's what this show is for us. And, we were talking about a week ago about the fortune cookie, curse, may you live in interesting times. The Lunar New Year just started too, so happy year of the rat. But it is interesting times, and 2020 has come out like gangbusters in terms of the 24/7 news cycle. And it reached such a point that I think many of us, I know I certainly am, just kind of overloaded to the point where I need time away. So we wanted to do a show about that. Like, we talked last year about JOMO, the joy of missing out, which I think is something that's been bubbling back up to mind for me. But news wise, we had the Kobe Bryant tragedy, which I know shook both of us as well as just about everybody who was impacted by it. We definitely wanted to talk about that, and that's coming right in the midst of the impeachment trial, the primaries, the Iowa caucuses, and Super Tuesday's coming. And what about New Hampshire? And then on top of that, you got the coronavirus. And on top of that, you got other stuff. And on top of that, you got more other stuff. So what do where's your head at, Dan, like with all this activity?
Well, you make the point about there's just so much, and you didn't even talk about necessarily regional or local news, like the
Right.
things that are happening to people in New York City or Chicago or Oklahoma City, wherever you might live, and that's part of this all too, is that we get inundated on social media with what's happening in the world, but these are just such large scale stories and
Right.
such newsworthy stories. To be quite honest, like if you were to even travel back 30 years ago, these would all be front page stories happening. Like these would
Right.
all be situations that would warrant some sort of big top of the mast headline, and they're all happening at the same time. And to your point, it feels as though we're at a point where January was a great year of news, where like we've had so much happen already
Yeah.
that it's been a lot. The Kobe Bryant one stands out. I think we've talked before about me being, and I know you are a big basketball fan, big sports fans.
Yeah.
But when someone your age, younger than you, passes, that was such a big icon,
Mhm.
it's a weird feeling because you didn't know him personally. You
Yeah.
didn't, you didn't interact with him, but you did in a way. You watched him and you were amazed by his athleticism. And then I know we'll talk about this a little later, but also he became a little bit bigger than the sport even after the fact.
Yeah.
And he became a philanthropist and he became a teacher, and you could see him with his kids at games. And that's where I think it really hit so many people,
Yeah.
why it mattered so much.
Yeah, exactly. And such a big personality. So, such a media personality. Like his whole life, he grew up as like sort of a
Yep.
singular figure in our media for good and bad. And and America loves a redemption story. And he was an amazing redemption story. And also he had an element of an anti-hero vibe too, where like he believed in what he was doing and he really didn't care what you thought about him. And the so-called Mamba mentality, which I think is going to make the NBA just must. It was already as an NBA fan. It was kind of as a Knicks fan. The NBA more broadly is such an
Yes.
incredible product these days that I kind of had to keep watching it. But this I think is making it even more compelling. But honestly, like it was a little too much right away. Like I do, it does make me think about the speed with which we're supposed to go through the stages of dabda. Like we're supposed to like be done with Kobe's grieving process so that we can get on to the next thing.
Yep.
And I think we all need to kind of take these things at their own paces. And I've been struck also, it reminded me when my dad passed away a few years ago, right after he passed, I stopped listening to podcasts and audio, like spoken word in my ears. I was like, I just need some time. I need time for myself to think. And I have been struck by that this year. So, and I think Kobe's passing probably really is what pushed me over the top, because it's not like I felt like the coverage was exploitative or too much. It's just it was too much for me,
Yep.
and I just need my own sort of quiet so that I understand how I'm doing. And that to me is more the learning educational trend that I think is really interesting. Is just having control over your feed, like how much input you're ready to take in at any point in time, being able to shut it off entirely,
Yep.
and then having some control over like when I want to go back in and when I want to really deal with this, when I'm ready, how do I do it? How do I find the right things? That's definitely probably most profound for me on the Kobe thing, because it is like losing a family member or, you know, someone you're close to just because you've been around him so much.
Yep.
But then on top of that, you know, I think the same thing is true for the impeachment trial, where like I tried watching a lot of it, and then it wasn't particularly valuable to watch. You know, like it's like the new there wasn't a lot of news really. It was
Right.
just kind of happening. So,
Well,
any
there,
thoughts on being able to control the feed and other thoughts on Kobe? You know, we basically we didn't want to not talk about this because I think it was a profound experience for us, and as well as the other people. You know, Tarlin, who I talked to. Melissa, you know, other folks who are on the show regularly are similarly affected. Just about everybody, even
yeah.
people I think didn't expect to be affected.
Well, I think the story, because of the family
Yeah,
aspect that we saw after the NBA career, I think he spoke to more people in that light. You see the
yeah,
video of him sitting on the sidelines talking to his daughter
yeah,
while they're watching the game.
yeah.
That's any dad with their kid or any
Yeah.
mom with their kid trying to explain life, like explain what's happening.
Except
But
maybe not courtside, but yes,
right, exactly. That's a very good point.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe up in the rafters somewhere. But I think that is part of why it hit so many more people. I
yeah,
do think social media obviously plays a role here, and he was sort of at the tail end, but he was one of the digital NBA players. He's
yeah,
somebody that's been so, as you said, in front of us.
yeah,
I will say a couple of thoughts about Kobe and then the impeachment. And I do want to preface this all. We've talked before about drinking out of the fire hose or
yeah,
drinking out of the fire hydrant.
yeah,
Like it feels like the hydrant's open. You know, we're trying to get all this information, and maybe trying to put the cap back on isn't the worst idea from time to time. So
right,
I agree with you completely there. One, watching it in real time will stay with me for a while. So watching the report from TMZ pop up on my Twitter feed and having that moment of this can't be true. Like this, but we're at a point where TMZ breaks news, and if they're going to publish it,
yeah,
they have at least enough information to go forward with it.
mhm,
To then go through the process, though, of multiple erroneous reports
yep,
about who was on the helicopter, who was not on the helicopter, how many people, what happened, that will stick with me as the new normal.
yeah,
The fact that we are living through live reporting.
yeah,
And I will say two thoughts on that. As a journalism student, it's rough, and it's their business is completely changed, and they're trying to be first, they're trying to be fast, and that means facts get left behind.
mm-hmm,
And so that's rough, and that makes me feel like that's how bad information gets out there. It's a game of telephone, but it's also almost a real-time grieving that
yeah,
happens, because we're all like, it's an emotional roller coaster of his entire family was on the helicopter. Well, no, they weren't. He was by himself. And then
yeah,
it was his daughter. Wait, there were 7 other people on this helicopter.
right,
And like,
right,
it just becomes this sort of too much, to your point.
right,
Like, I need to check out. You know me, I don't put my phone down often. I
yeah,
walk away. And
yeah,
like, I did I'm going to check in on my kids. And
right,
that the dad girl hashtag was born out of this
yeah.
girl dad.
That was the other aspect that I wanted to make sure we talked about. Can you give your take on that a little bit as someone who, you know, father of three
Three.
girls, and then to your point, like I think, you know, a lot of the NBA is sort of it's like a mythology of manhood
Hmm.
and striving, and it is interesting how increasingly moving away from maybe the 90s model, like, you know, Barkley in the 90s, I don't need to be a role model. You know, Jordan was sort of squeaky clean, but, you know, in terms of his image, but then in terms of the reality, maybe less so. But now it's almost like, you know, we really are expecting the luminaries within the NBA to be like, humanitarian, givers. And, Kobe was able to do that in his own way. And I think the main way in which he did that was trying to give back, whether it was to like the rising generation of athletes, not just in the NBA specifically, but more broadly. He started the Mamba Academy. He was very involved in his daughter Gigi's basketball team. And in fact, that was what he was out in the helicopter going to a game.
Yeah, travel game, yeah.
When this tragedy struck. I think that in some ways that was a nice outcome, even though it was really tragic, particularly losing someone so young in his daughter. But it does seem like it has allowed everybody to sort of hold on to some sense of meaning, some sense of family in response to this tragedy. Any thoughts as the only hashtag girl dad on the call right now? Any takes on that?
Well, I forget, and apologies, the ESPN anchor's name, who sort of kicked off that story thread where she shared an emotional reaction where Kobe had seen her. She was 8 months pregnant, and she was starstruck. And yes, journalists can be starstruck, and yes, anchors can see somebody and be like, "Holy cow, I'm eating Al Pacino," or that's gonna get to people. And Kobe Bryant's one of those. And so she took some time to ask him to take a picture, and then he stopped her to talk about her being pregnant and what are you having, and she said, "I'm having a girl." He goes, "Girls are the best." Girls are the best. And he just went through and they talked for a half hour. And seek out this video. I've shared it. It's all over Twitter. But then it born a movement on Twitter of people sharing pictures of fathers sharing pictures of their daughters and their stories, being proud of it. And I think as a society, we've grown a lot in many years of men wanting to have boys and women wanting to have girls, and how that is what it is. I've been lucky to have 3 girls. My eyes have been opened to a whole different world because of it. And that got to me. I went through, I would say probably 200, 300 tweets, Mike. I just kept reading. Like I kept scrolling, kept reading, kept liking, and just trying to have, to your point, that almost connection with other people who I'll never see nor talk to, but have that moment of, me. I get it. Like, and I think you can get it if you're not a father or mother of a girl. I think you can empathize and you can see it, but it was really, and again, cool or great, or the tragedy matters most, but it was a great thing to see social media be for good for that moment, and be something that brought people together, let them mourn together, and hold that moment a little longer, right? Like it lasted a little bit longer than the fleeting, to your point, well, onto impeachment, onto Iowa, onto coronavirus, onto whatever's on the front page of the next day.
No, I agree. And as a hashtag boy dad, which is not trending nearly as much, it is a place to appreciate the maybe broadening of the understanding of what it means to be a man. And also as someone who's getting further on in my years too, like there is that phase of like letting go of your young adult, athletic identity,
right?
And then embracing.
I let go of that a long time ago.
But it was nice, I think, also beyond the girl dad thing. I think there was also the element of Kobe as an inspiration, as someone who was able to reinvent himself, and sort of he is a multi-potentialite. Like he had the ability to do a lot of different things, and he was just gearing up to start doing some new things.
Yeah, there's an investment fund he was involved with. There was, and to your point about other athletes, he was big in the Olympics. Like he would go to swimming competitions, and he'd go, like he was a teammate, and not just to his 11 other basketball teammates, but he was there to be an American and to support everyone, which aren't stories you hear necessarily as it's all going on, and they come out after the fact, for sure.
Yeah, and there's more to the story, obviously. Like, I think in the fullness of time, he was a complex figure. There are reasons that some folks are not big Kobe fans, and they're genuine, and there's more to talk about as the story continues. It does seem like he will have kind of like a James Dean, Che Guevara kind of presence. Like, LeBron and Anthony Davis got the Kobe tattoos. I doubt they're the only ones who are like his iconography, his image, I think will stay with us.
The All-Star game, changing the rules of the All-Star game.
Like there's just going to be a lot of that. And I think there will probably be some fatigue for some of us around dealing with all that. But it was something that just kind of, it was like a wake up call, I guess, because had we not had this intensely human story of loss and tragedy as a counterpoint to the spectacle, even as it was part of the spectacle, I think things would have felt a little more empty and hollow. So even though there is some pain in processing the Kobe's narrative, it is a place where, like, I think some of the more positive aspects of our humanity is
Absolutely
surfacing. So that's great. But then to round out, it wouldn't be a 2020 spectacle show without talking about the impeachment trial and the coronavirus.
Yeah,
Where do you
you said before about you tried to watch, and I will say I did try to watch some of the impeachment. I did watch some of it. I honestly followed it more via people's angry tweets than I did about, and from both sides. You know, I try to get a flavor of different viewpoints when I'm on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook anymore, so I don't get that flavor.
Yeah.
But I will say this: I think from an educational standpoint, from a civic standpoint, we've talked to Mark Sanders in the past before about civics. There are lessons here, and I hope history teachers and civics teachers are using what's happening there. Even law teachers are using what's happening live and in person as instructional content, because those are the best teachers. Hey, this is what's happening in the real world. Here's what you need to know. Here's how we can think about it in class. We don't necessarily need to get into the politics of it. We can talk about the mechanics and the mechanisms and how and why this is or isn't working. I will say it is, from a voter standpoint, has emboldened me to make sure I'm involved this year, watching those proceedings and the Iowa caucus proceedings, that I want to be more involved than I've been in the past, positively or negatively against any candidate. No, but just making sure that I'm doing my part to be involved. The spectacle of it all, the theatrics of it all depresses me a little bit. Like you said it, and it almost feels like it shouldn't be good to watch. Like it should have that like sort of C-SPAN. I'm going to tune in for a few minutes and maybe there's a great quote that comes out of it. I think Adam Schiff, from my personal standpoint, was a great orator. And I think Dershowitz did a great job of telling his story, of spinning his yarns and trying to make his case. So they were both interesting to watch in their presentation and how they went about things. But to the spectacle of it all, it was a lot. Like, and it still is a lot. And I don't know how much it's going to hang. We have the State of the Union, into the Iowa caucus debacle, to New Hampshire, to the rest of Super Tuesday. So to your point, come Valentine's Day or March 15th, or what, how much will we remember? Like how much will still be a part of what we're talking about then, what's happening as we record this podcast?
Yeah, I'm not sure. And at the same time, like, I do find it rich or maybe ironic, I don't know, whichever way you want to talk about it, that there's this sort of the equivalent of wrapping themselves in the flag. There is wrapping themselves in the voting booth as like, this is what our democracy is. Let's trust the voters. Let's not, it's not Congress's job to decide. It's the electorate's job to decide. And then for the Iowa caucuses to be a shit show, to be crass about it.
That's the only word that I think can describe it, to be quite honest.
You know, it doesn't inspire confidence, and it is pretty much all we're left with. And the thing that I'm coming back to is like the daily cycle of old school news, where you would get the paper, probably not a lot of like extra read all about it. You just get the paper. And whatever was news up until, say, 3 a.m. the day before got in, and everything else, you had to wait a day. And it had to hit the form factor of the certain number of pages and their editorial choices about what you cover, what you don't. I think there's a lot of value in that, where then you have to partition your time and you're saying, okay, I can get through the paper in the morning and that's how I'm going to get my information. Because I think there's this illusion of value for getting something fast, when frequently what you get, like, you become the equivalent of a journalist, and you're like, it's a developing story. This just in, we'll get back soon. And it does remind me, you know, I think we've talked about the watermelon video that went viral, you know, rubber bands. Live stream of these people putting rubber bands around a watermelon, because at some point, after several thousand rubber bands are
BuzzFeed?
Yeah, I forget where it was, but it got like record-breaking viewership, because if you get in early, it's kind of ludicrous and you start watching. But once you sink a little bit of your time into watching this thing develop, when is the watermelon going to burst? You know, the suspense builds, and then eventually you can't stop watching because you don't know what's going to come next, and that sort of just draws your attention in. I think that can be really dangerous nowadays because everything is firing off those kind of suspense endorphins to say, if you aren't watching this when the news gets in, you're a loser. You don't know what's going on. And like, it's actually the opposite is true. Like if you take some time to lean into your life and you realize, you know, I'll find out eventually, you know, who won the caucus. I'll find out eventually, you know, that tragically had the 9 people who lost their lives, you know, beyond just the celebrities who did. I do think there is some value in the slower cycle time, and we want that fast twitch, you know, fire. What just came in? Did I think it reminds me of the people in the comments, you know, first, you know, you want to get in there first, and I'm just pumping the brakes on first. You know, like I don't feel like I need to be first. I'd rather just take my time. So I know March Madness is coming. I think we got to put JOMO back in because I think JOMO.
I think it's a strong contender.
The joy of missing out, the joy of turning off the feed. Hopefully, everyone who's listening to this knows how to do that. Just don't turn off your subscription to Trending in Education, but turn off your feed, turn off your notifications. It's just better for your brain.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, from a learning perspective, like if we're meant to be learning from things that are happening every day, right? We're all learners. We're all students of life and trying to learn from what we read and what we interact with. We've talked about spaced repetition. We've talked about the idea of doing, you know, different tasks. Specifically, if I'm, you know, trying to do work at my day job and I'm reading Twitter, I'm clearly not as involved with what I'm doing because I care about what's happening in the outside world. What's happening right now.
Yeah.
Seems like, and we did the Twitter show a few months back around studying on Twitter. It wasn't a great study, but not surprisingly, it said it doesn't work. It feels like from a learning perspective, it's hard to retain the things that are coming out of the fire hydrant. How do we grabbing bits and pieces, a couple of maybe droplets, but we're not catching any water.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And the importance of silence and the importance of quiet, you know, reflective time. That's when your brain consolidates its memories. You know, like that's when something you learned needs to be sort of consolidated and filed into your long-term memory stores so that you have access to it later. Best case, you're able to consolidate those memories. You know, you take a little bit of time, particularly maybe end of your day, right before you go into bed, you're consolidating your thinking. That is what really puts things into your mind. The other thing that does put things into some sense of clarity at an individual level is talking about them and being forced to put forth what you think in a more structured way. So that's where I do recommend to others something similar to what we've been doing on this show, is forcing yourself to get your thinking together and produce some artifacts that capture your perspective after some reflection, whether that's journaling, whether that's doing a podcast, whether that's, you know, doing some sort of artistic expression or bursting into song, whatever it is. Taking some time to do that, I think, is cathartic. It's emotionally healthy, and frequently, particularly around something as challenging as Kobe passing, frequently it will bear fruit because it's a meaningful topic to you. And if you can then be vulnerable and express yourself in some way about that thing, it may help you reach some sense of closure. So it's been useful for me. Like I think I mentioned, I've been taking more walks without sound. You know, I was very used to listening to podcasts all the time, getting audiobooks, a lot of inputs. And I'm realizing more and more that we do need time to reflect, consolidate, and organize our own perspective on those inputs. And to your point, I think we're woefully under allocating our attention to that aspect of things. And that's where we were talking a bit about the salience network of the brain, but like there are actually different modes of processing that can kick in when you're not in that reactive, what's the latest thing on the feed? how do I stay relevant? How do I get status as it relates to all this?
It feels like cramming. It
Yeah.
feels like, we're trying to cram so much in at all times that only so much can stay in our brain. The studies are out there showing, like, yes, you may recall it the next day and you may be able to pass a test for it. And that's, the testing systems we have. And we can
Yeah.
talk about that separately, but maybe you pass the test. Recalling that information 6 months, a year, or 2 years later is going to be very hard because of the way you absorb that information. It's the same right now.
Yeah.
Honestly, watching the caucus stuff last night, I'd probably have a tough time recalling any finite, specific details because of how much they were talking about nothing. They just kept talking about that situation. So I think I am attempting to make those changes. I have not yet, to putting the phone down more and being more focused on what's happening around me, taking walks, getting out, not even into nature, just outside, like outside of those inputs. But I do think it's interesting times, as may you live in interesting times. We have the ability to choose what we let in. We have the ability to shut things off and to step away. And I am one who is, I need it now, news aggregator. Like I just want to know what's going on in the world. I'm refreshing my Twitter feed pretty regularly. But to your point, it's still going to be there in an hour. It's still going to be there in 4 hours. It's going to be there tomorrow. Journalists 100 years ago got things wrong. Retractions happened the next day. So like it's still going to exist. It's still going to be out there, and you're still going to have an opportunity to interact with it and to be a part of it if you choose, or to just let it go by. So I think from a learning perspective, a personal learning, social emotional learning we've talked about before, I think there's a lot to be at least studied and understood about these times, as interesting as they are, and how we interact with them and how social media is playing a part in it all.
Yeah, for sure. And it's something I think we'll come back to, sort of like the media criticism side of the show, like just try to understand what's the best way to consume all of this stuff, because we are a trend spotting show. We do want to stay relevant. We don't want to have our head in the sand. But at the same time, maybe a little time, ostriches put their heads in, it's ostriches, right? Like,
yes,
they do it for an adaptive reason. Like if it didn't work, they probably wouldn't. I mean, again, I'm buying into Darwin's take on evolution, but the head in the sand, like there were other reasons for it. And like, if I could get a nice handy dandy sensory deprivation tank for power naps, I might be, hopping in, 3 or 4 times a day, just for the good of it,
I did find BuzzFeed 2016, April 8th, 11 million views since the live stream, and since they exploded a rubber band, they exploded a watermelon, one rubber band at a time.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So we'll reshare that. And at the same time, maybe we'll try to lean into that and build some spectacle and, crowd surf on the crazy this year, because you don't take yourself too seriously. But at the same time, I'd say if you're not finding ways to get time away, you're probably hurting yourself. You're like, it's these things are designed to be habit forming. So I think figuring out how to control your intake and curb some of your addictions, really interesting space for us to keep an eye on. Any final thoughts, Daniel?
There's more to come. And we know that, right? The news cycle is not going to slow down anytime soon. 2020 election cycle is obviously going to continue to ramp up. So I think talking about this now and making decisions now on how to approach that will only be better for everyone. So I'm happy to do that for myself, looking forward. And if there are stories that interest you, let us know. I always like to hear from folks over at Trending Ed, or I'm at Dan Strafford on Twitter. You see me refreshing all the time over there. But I do like consuming good content. And so if you have on learning, on also consuming media, where you see media going, we'd love to hear from each and every one of you as well.
Yeah, for sure. And stay critical. And just remember, if you're playing with your head up nowadays, you almost have a bit of a responsibility to pay that forward. So like, if you see something, say something. And if the immediate fast twitch response doesn't feel right, take some time, see what happens. Like, lots of windows of opportunity emerge once you get out of the race to be first. So, and with that, it is time to think about your family, the people you love, and really value everyone, every moment that we have them. And yeah, thanks again for listening. We'll be back again soon on Trending in Education. Don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends and family when you're reaching out to them, to hug them and value them. Say, and while I'm hugging you and valuing you, this is a great podcast about what's emerging in trends in education. It's called Trending in Education. And thanks again, Dan, for taking the time, and we'll be back again soon.